doing these workshops. We've done it at churches, schools, and actually people's backyards. But now because of COVID, we have to do them online. And so, but I'm really happy to share our space and time with you today, and hopefully we can answer all your questions.
Okay, so the agenda is broken down as to, we're going to share a little bit of the services that we provide as an organization. And also, as mentioned, we'll do a breakdown of what is public charge. And we'll start with like the old rule and then the new rule that took effect into this year, but also it was introduced as a final rule last year in August 2019. The litigation, the battle at the court, and also some an announcement that was made by the Immigration Office by USCIS in regards to COVID and treatment that folks need during this time of pandemic. And the closing will be where we share the resources and connection to other organizations that are doing this kind of work. So briefly, San Bernardino Community Service Center, SBC for short, organization provides free or low cost immigration services to immigrant folks in the Inland Empire, and we've been doing this since 2001. And we do this additionally, aside from the direct services, we also engage in state and local advocacy and like public charge. Us being out in the community is also engaging them in conversations that impact their daily lives. We also do the community empowerment, and we do that like with Know Your Rights presentation, creating family plans when it comes to what if ICE comes to my house, how do I as a family respond? Someone said something or? Okay. So that's our three key ideas or of SBC, or like the services that we focus on. And this is some of the work that has happened throughout 2020. A lot of direct services, like by going to schools. I know during May to June, we were providing direct assistance by providing cash assistance to undocumented folks affected by COVID during the pandemic. So, okay. And I'll pass the mic to Russell.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about public charge and what it is, okay, and again, the policy and how it's implemented. So the key here is that the law you're going to see really hasn't changed much. It's the implementation and the policy in the implementation of the law that has changed. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so what is public charge? Okay, what is it? It is a test to determine if someone applying for permanent residency through a relative, and that's basically where it comes up, through a relative or a visa to enter the United States is likely to depend on public benefits in the future. Okay, so just think of it this way. Think of the United States being a hotel. And so when a person is trying to immigrate, they must show that they're what's called admissible as an immigrant. They must show that they are admissible to get into Hotel USA. So another example, let's say, for example, that I am a US citizen and I want to immigrate my undocumented wife, okay? So one of the things we must prove is that she's admissible as an immigrant to get into Hotel USA. So we have to prove that she hasn't been convicted of certain crimes, she hasn't smuggled anybody, she hasn't lied on an immigration benefit or lied to an officer to get into the US, okay? And she also must prove that she is not going to become a public charge in the future, okay? So that's basically the idea. Now for a visa, say for example, I have an aunt who wants to enter the US on a visitor's visa. Like say she lives in Mexico and she goes to the US, the nearest US consulate, and wants to apply for a visa to enter as a visitor, then she would also be subject to the public charge test, okay? Okay, so it really, again, the test is only applied at really two certain points, okay? One, okay, when a person is requesting to enter the US, so just think of the example, my aunt who's applying, who wants to come and visit in the United States, she's applying for a visitor's visa. She must show that she's not likely to become a public charge, or this is the one that where it comes up the most. Someone is applying for an immigration benefit. Someone is applying to become a permanent resident through a family-based petition. For example, I am trying to immigrate my spouse, my parents, my children. Okay, they must show, okay, that they will not become what's called a public charge. Okay, so and this usually comes up like with there's three agencies, United States agencies where the public charge test comes up. Number one, the Department of State. It's called consular processing. So again, let me use myself as an example. I'm trying to immigrate my wife and say she lives in Mexico. Just say I went to Mexico, I fell in love. Okay, we married over there, and now I want to immigrate her into the US, okay? But she's in Mexico. Then she must do what's called consular processing. In other words, we can start the process here, but she will have to be interviewed, at the US consulate in Juarez, Mexico for her family-based petition to proceed. And during that process, she must prove that she will not become a public charge. Or say, for example, my wife is here in the United States, okay, but she came in without status. In other words, she came in, illegally, and I want to immigrate her, and I file a family petition. In that case, she must leave the US, okay, and finish the process, okay, abroad, say at the US consulate in Mexico, in Juarez, Mexico, and there, again, she must prove that she will not become what's called a public charge. And later on, we're going to talk about the 2019 rule, how it's basically blocked at this particular section, okay? Department of Homeland Security, USCIS, this is the big one, okay? This is what everybody wants to do because everybody wants to adjust their status in the United States. For example, let's just say I'm married to an undocumented, say that my wife entered the US on a visa. She came as a visitor, and I'm a US citizen. Without going into great detail about immigration law, if she came in legally and I'm a US citizen, she can finish the process here. In other words, she can try to adjust her status in the US. Okay, we can do the family petition. We can do the family petition here, and we can file what's called an adjustment of status application for her, so she can do the entire process here. And here, and there she will have her interview with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Okay, the local office is here in San Bernardino. That's where we have most of our adjustment interviews. And so in that case, that's where also she will have to prove that she will not become a public charge. The third department is the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice. What if, again, my wife, I'm a U.S. citizen. Let's say she came in legally on a visitor's visa, but she's caught as overstaying her visa, and they put her into immigration court proceedings for deportation proceedings. At that point, she can use adjustment of status as a defense to deportation. Okay, and we can file her adjustment of status application with the immigration court. And at that point, she also has to prove that she will not become a public charge. Okay. Okay, now there are certain immigrants who are not subject to public charge. Okay, who are they? In other words, these people they don't have to worry about becoming whether if they get benefits, whether they're going to become a public charge. So refugees and asylees, okay, just think of those people who are coming to the U.S. In fear of their lives because of oppression, political oppression, or they participate in a particular group or something, and they're fleeing the U.S. They're not subject to the public charge test. Refugees are those people who are abroad. Think of people like someone in Somalia or Syria or Iraq, and they're trying to flee. They're fleeing those countries and they want to apply as refugees. Then they go to a place that's designated by the United Nations to where they can apply for refugee status and try to get into the US because they're coming because they have a certain fear, okay? Asylees are those people, think of the people from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, who are coming because they've been persecuted by gang members, or they have been subject to abuse as a woman. Okay, and they're fleeing those countries to get into the U.S. and they enter the US unlawfully, or they turn themselves in at the border, then they can apply for what's called political asylum, which is basically the same thing as being a refugee. But if they get to the border, or they enter unlawfully into the US, they can apply for political asylum. Basically, the test is you must show that you have a fear of persecution based on your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or social group. And the biggest ones right now by far are people fleeing, again, gang violence or abuse in those three countries in Central America: Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Okay, special immigrant juvenile status, what is that? Okay, again, let's just use the example of those three countries: El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. If many of the youth come over here, or they flee those countries because they have been persecuted by gang members, either because they're being forced to join a gang, or they have been threatened by a gang, or they have already been assaulted by a gang. Okay, so if they're under the age of 18 and they arrive in the US on their own, then they can apply for something called a special immigrant juvenile status. Okay, it's a little more complicated because they must go through a state court proceeding first and prove that that there's no hope of reunification with one or both of their parents because of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. And if they meet that test in state court, then they can apply for what's called the special immigrant juvenile status. Okay, and they can get their permanent residency through the special immigrant juvenile status. Okay, when they apply for that, they're not subject to the public charge test. Victims of certain crimes, say for example, a person's undocumented and let's use a woman is undocumented and she's married to someone who also is undocumented, but she's a victim of abuse, then she can apply for something called a U visa. If you're a victim of a certain type of crime, say domestic abuse or something violent, a robbery, then you can apply for something called a U visa, okay, because you're a victim of a particular crime and that you have cooperated with law enforcement in the investigation of that crime. So that's called a U visa, okay? And if you apply to obtain a U visa, you're not subject to the public charge test. VAWA is called the Violence Against Women's Act. Okay, once again, what if an undocumented woman marries a US citizen or permanent resident? In other words, they marry someone who's got status, either a US citizen or permanent resident, and they are victims of abuse, then they can apply for to adjust their status on their own, okay? On their own as a victim of abuse, okay? And so those are called VAWA petitions. And once again, people who apply for VAWA status, they are not subject to the public charge test. Victims of human trafficking, those are T visas. Those are people that are victims of either, like, say, they've been trafficked to do sex work, you know, to do sex work, okay, forced sex work, or they've been trafficked to do forced labor, okay, then that's called a T visa. If they apply for what's called a T visa, they're not subject to the public charge test. DACA, as most of you are probably aware, that's for a particular young people who arrived here at an early age. They right now have what's called DACA status. If you apply for DACA, you're not subject to the public charge test. However, let's just say if you have DACA now, and you later on let's say a person marries a US citizen and they want to adjust their status in the US, then they would be subject to the public charge test because they're applying to adjust their status, okay, not just to have DACA status, okay? TPS is temporary protective status, okay? That applies once again to certain countries, and one of the big ones is El Salvador. Many people come from El Salvador or Haiti or Honduras because of political strife or because of earthquakes. The government has designated them for temporary protective status. So those people that apply for what's called temporary protective status, or TPS, are not subject to the public charge test. Most legal permanent residents, again, those people that already have their status or they have their green card, they're not subject to the public charge test, and neither are US citizens. Okay, so once again, what the law says, okay, this is the literal reading of the law. Any foreigner who at the time of applying for admission or adjustment of status, again, once again, a person is either outside the US and is applying to get into the US, or is here in the US and is applying to adjust their status, is likely to become a public charge at any time, is inadmissible. In other words, they're inadmissible to get into Health Hotel USA. Okay. All right. Now that's the law. Okay, that's the law. And so the law itself has been around for a little bit. Okay, it's been around since basically the 1800s. Okay, and the law, quite frankly, has been used as a sword to keep certain people out. Okay, for example, the first public charge test came around 1880 when unfortunately our country passed something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically said, although the Chinese built our railroads, we don't like them anymore, so now we're going to basically ban all Chinese from coming to the United States. And so at that time was when they first had this public charge test. In other words, people who were what they call vagabonds, or people who weren't working, we don't like them, they're going to become what's called public charges. The worst example of a public charge, the public charge test, was during World War II, when a group of some Jewish people from Eastern Europe were basically fleeing Germany, okay, and they wanted to get into the United States. They came on boats, okay, and unfortunately they were turned away because our government said they're likely to become public charges. And so it doesn't have a very good history, okay. The public charge is, something that's been used, something as a tool, as a sword to keep certain people out. And so, okay, now we can go forward. Now, again, the law itself really hasn't changed. It's the implementation or the policy that implements the law where we've seen some major changes, okay? So in 1999, there was a welfare, this is under the Clinton administration, there was a Welfare Reform Act that was enacted, okay? And it basically said certain people, are not allowed to get certain public benefits, and some people get benefits unlawfully, and they're cheating the government, that kind of stuff. So regarding immigrants, there at least was a discussion among certain agencies that dealt with benefits, okay? Like the Department of Health and Human Services, agriculture which distributes food stamps, and the Social Security Administration. And so they all at least had a conversation about a policy regarding public charge, okay? Because their concern was that this new welfare reform law had generated confusion, just like there is today, among immigrants and applying for certain benefits. And so, there was, the basic concern was that, and this is a quote from this whole discussion was, and this is relevant for today, the situation is becoming particularly acute with respect to the provisions of emergency and other medical assistance, children's immunizations, and basic nutrition programs, as well as the treatment of communicable diseases. Immigrants' fears of obtaining these necessary medical and other benefits are not only causing them considerable harm, but is jeopardizing the entire public. So we need to come up with some type of coherent public policy that recognizes the needs of immigrants. Okay, so this is what they came up with in 1999. Okay, so a public charge, for them to consider someone to become a public charge, mainly depend on two things. Okay, whether the person received cash assistance alone to maintain themselves. Okay, in other words, they weren't working, and they were just solely relied on cash assistance, okay, like say welfare or a general assistance, okay? Or number two, the person was subject to long-term care. In other words, someone who was very ill, say they had cancer or they were elderly, and they had to be in a long-term care situation that was funded by the government. Then in those two situations, they would consider those particular people to become what's called public charge, okay? In other words, they won't be able to work for themselves. They're going to be basically relying on public assistance the rest of their lives. So they would be considered to be public charges, okay? But again, at this point, there was a very important exception to that, and that is the use of benefits by family members who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, or even undocumented folks, who just say children, does not count against the actual applicant. Okay, all right. Okay, so once again, who does public charge affect? Okay, it only applies to people applying for permanent resident through a green card, through a relative, or once again, or a visa, someone who's trying to get into the US. Okay, no other types of immigration cases are impacted. Okay, what if you have your green card? What if you're a permanent resident? Okay, are you subject to the public charge test? No, generally no. Okay, and this is, again, this is a very legal, very, very technical, but if a person has a permanent residency card and they travel abroad for more than 180 days, in other words, 6 months, then they're presumed to have abandoned their residency. And if they try to come back into the US, then they could be subject to the public charge. But that doesn't happen a whole lot, okay? Okay, and there's no public charge test when a legal permanent resident applies for US citizenship, okay? And we get a lot of questions of someone who's a legal permanent resident, I'm getting aid right now, and I wanna apply for US citizenship. Can I still apply for citizenship? The answer is yes, okay? The only exception is, once again, if that person left for 6 months and then came back in the US, okay? Okay, so public charge is a test that looks to the future. It's whether a person will become a public charge in the future. In other words, again, I'm trying to immigrate my U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm trying to immigrate my wife. The test is whether she will become a public charge in the future. So to going back even to the receipt of certain benefits. Okay, let's just say my wife did get aid for a while. Okay, and what if we can show that, well, she's young and she was sick during that time, or I was unemployed, but given our age and education, we can find jobs in the future. Then that's something called the totality of circumstances. And when they look at the big picture and using the old test, most people were able to prove that no, you will not become a public charge, even though you may have received some aid in the past, but where you're at now is different because of your age, because of your education, because of your ability to work. You may not be subject to the public charge test. Okay. Now, this all changed. Okay, so from 1999 to 2019, we used the 1999 test. And I've been practicing immigration law now for about 25 years. And I can tell you that I've done hundreds of adjustment cases, and the public charge test was never a problem. It never was, okay? Because most people just didn't fit the definition, okay? So public charge was never an issue until now. Now, and the reason it became an issue is, as you're probably all aware, immigration law is subject to the political whims of our time, okay? And so now, and again, the test is, the law really hasn't changed, it's the implementation of the law that has changed. And so now with the Trump administration, this administration has taken a harsher view of public charge, okay? And whereas in the past, there was a big discussion between different agencies, Social Security, Department of Health and Human Services and Agriculture, that's not what happened this time. There was one person in the White House named Stephen Miller, who is basically President Trump's immigration person, and he made the decision that we were going to basically change the public charge rule, okay? And so now there's a new definition. It expanded the list of benefits that could count as a public charge, and this totality of circumstances test became much more stricter and much more harsher, okay? All right, so the 1999 policy, again, was someone who was likely to get public benefits in the future, okay? Someone who was likely to receive only government assistance in order to maintain themselves, but again, it was a future test. Well, this new 2019 rule states one of the ways they changed this law, the policy change, not the law, the policy change was that an immigrant who receives one or more public benefits for more than 12 months within a 36-month period will be subject to the public charge test, okay? So again, it's one or more public benefits for more than 12 months within a 36-month period. That person will be subject to the public charge test. And what are the benefits that they're talking about that makes them subject to the public charge now? Go ahead. Okay, so Medicaid, okay, this is like, but here it's federal Medicaid, okay, paid by the federal government. So the exception is if they're just getting Medi-Cal that's paid solely by California, they're not subject to the public charge test. Only if they're getting Medicaid that is funded by the federal government. Okay, so they get solely state-funded Medi-Cal, then it's not going to hurt them. If they get solely Medicaid that's funded by the federal government, that's one of the benefits that can hurt them. We receive now food stamps. Unfortunately, food stamps, okay, is now one of those benefits that counts, okay? Or Section 8 housing, okay, that again, that's paid for by the federal government, or rent project-based rental assistance, that's usually based on need, okay? But again, these are federal programs, okay? So the receipt of Medicaid, excuse me, that's funded by the federal government, food stamps funded by the federal government, and Section 8 housing funded by the federal government, those trigger now the public charge test. Again, long-term care still is something that could trigger the public charge test, and the receipt of cash assistance, basically SSI, that's Social Security Supplemental Income, General Assistance, and TANF, okay? So these are the programs where if a person has received those programs for more than 12 months within a 36-month period, they will count towards, that will trigger the public charge test, okay? So, okay, let's go forward. We'll talk about the wealth test in a second. Okay, now, under the old rule, again, there was also something called the totality of circumstances, okay? Where a person's age, health, financial resources, family situation, education and skills, something called an affidavit of support, are among some factors that also could be used to determine whether somebody is going to become a public charge. Okay, so under the old rule, for example, again, if my wife received aid for a while because I was out of work, let's say I'm a US citizen, I wasn't working and she was sick, then we can show, look, we're both educated, we're both working, so in the future, we will be able to support ourselves. Then that's part of the totality of circumstances test that people could look at, okay, and determine, okay, well, this person is not going to be subject to the public charge test. Okay. Okay, no. Okay, so now, but this is where the new test is really going to hurt. Okay, this is where, because, go back in a second, let me take something. Okay, I forgot I mentioned something. Go back one more. Okay, but let me just make a point about these benefits here, okay? The federal Medicaid, the federal food stamps, and Section 8 housing. The reality is undocumented folks are not eligible for these programs, okay, because of their status, okay? And even when a person becomes a permanent resident, they have to wait 5 years before they can get these public benefits, okay? So this seems harsh, but mostly we don't believe that this is really going to have a big effect on the immigrant community because most undocumented folks are not eligible for these benefits anyways, okay? It is the totality of circumstances test that's going to hurt. Okay, now go ahead.
Also, sorry to interrupt. Before we move on, we have a question about the Medi-Cal versus Medicaid. So,
Right.
How do we advise patients going on distinguishing between federal Medicaid and normal Medi-Cal? So, are patients that in California using Medi-Cal, are they safe from public charge?
That's a good question, and we get it. This question comes a lot because even social workers or folks who assist with the enrolling don't know where funds are coming. But as far as like the state policies that have expanded Medi-Cal, that are mainly restrictive to like age, so like Health for All Kids, which is unrestricted Medi-Cal for underage,
It's unrestricted, right?
unrestricted
Yeah.
Medi-Cal for children who are under the age of 19. And then recently the expansion happened for young adults under the age of 26. It's hard to say like where the funds are coming, but based on eligibility and expansion that has happened at a state level. So for as of now, if you're under the age of 26 and are undocumented and meet the income eligibility, you're eligible for full scope Medi-Cal regardless of your status. But like for the rest of like 26 and older, at the moment there's no access to Medi-Cal in the state of California unless it's emergency Medi-Cal, restricted Medi-Cal.
Okay, thank you. And then the ones that are under 26, if they use the Medi-Cal, they won't be considered public charge, correct?
Because that expansion goes for undocumented young adults.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
okay.
And I can provide y'all with some of the bills of that made this expansion, so y'all can have that as a reading to do, and then also explain it to the service provider so they can also know about it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for clarifying.
Thanks.
Are we here?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so now this is where this new policy is really going to have an effect on, we believe, the community that we serve, which is low income, people that are coming from, say, Central, South America, Mexico, some folks from Asia, okay? Because the government changed the policy as to how this totality of circumstances is going to be implemented, okay? So now, under this new rule, a positive weight is if you're over the age of 18 and under the age of 64. A negative weight is you're under the age of 18 and over the age of 64. And basically, so what they're basically saying is, can this person work? But here's the tragedy of this, okay? What if, let's use myself as an example. What if I married my spouse, okay, let's say she's living in Mexico, and let's just say that we have a child who was born in Mexico. That means as a US citizen, I have to do 2 different petitions, one for my wife, okay, and one for my child. So using this policy, does that mean that my child who was recently born and under the age of 18 is going to be subject to this negative factor? Does that mean I and many other people will never be able to immigrate our children? According to this, that's what it looks like, okay? Or, this is where it's going to hurt a lot of people. Many people, let's just say, have relatives, and let's just, again, using Mexico as an example, because this is one that I'm familiar with. Many people who are citizens here want to immigrate their parents, okay? And the people that do that are usually, they're making very good money, okay? They're making okay money, but they want to bring their parents over, okay? And they earn enough to support them, okay? That's been a pattern in the past. But now, if someone tries to immigrate their parents and the parents are over the age of 64, is this going to preclude them from immigrating their own parents? To this, the way this policy reads, it looks like yes, they won't be able to immigrate. They would have a very hard time immigrating their own parents or their minor children. Okay, the second one. Okay, so a positive factor is if you have a household income of 250% of the federal poverty guideline. Okay, now what this means, does that mean that if you're under 250% of the federal poverty guideline, is that going to be a negative factor? Yes. Well, the reality is that most of our clients are the working poor. Okay, they're working. Okay, they are working. They just don't earn a lot of money. Okay, that's just reality. Okay, and so using this test, a lot of our own clients are going to have that could be a negative factor because most of them they don't make enough money to reach the 250% guideline. And again in the past, that has never been a problem. It has never been an issue because people are working. Okay, and then again, those who are sponsoring them earned enough to support them. Okay, all right. Private health insurance is deemed a positive factor. Now, again, most immigrants do not have the money to get their own. They don't have the money, nor do they have the job that will provide them with health insurance. Okay, so this could be deemed a negative factor. So this is another factor that could keep out a lot of people who just don't earn enough money, to obtain private health care right away, or who don't have a job that will provide them with health insurance. Okay. All right. Next one is a positive credit score. Okay, is a positive thing. Okay. Well, again, the reality is most undocumented folks don't have either credit score. Okay, and they don't have they don't have enough time here to have a credit history. Okay, So, or they don't have assets, okay? Because another positive thing is having assets, like you have a home, you have a property. Well, most undocumented folks do not have assets yet, okay? They don't have a home yet, okay? Or they don't have property yet, okay? So this is something as a negative factor that could be used to keep a lot of people out, because most studies show, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that over time, immigrants do their wealth or their earnings power, their earning capacity increases over time, okay? And that takes time. And after a while, they do have that positive credit score. They do have that health insurance, just not at the beginning. But that's where it's critical here, because you're trying to immigrate in the US, and that's where you may not have, again, a credit score or private health insurance or assets. Let's see. Okay, go back. Okay, again, English and higher education. I'm not too sure what this has to do with any public charge test, but that's what they're using now. So once again, most people coming from Central, South America, and Mexico do not have the English skills yet. Although, as some of you know, probably all of you know, studies show that immigrants' ability to learn English increases once they get here. Okay, so that's not a problem. Okay, and most people that are coming from, say, Central America and Mexico do not have a college education. Okay, but when they get here is when they go to school or their children go to school. Okay, so once again, this is a very, very harsh test. Okay, because most of our people are limited to English speaking, okay, and no education. And if they receive one of those benefits for what we talked about earlier for 12 months within the last 36 months, okay, then those are all negative factors. So the reality is that this public charge test has now become a wealth test. It's not a public charge, it's a wealth test. And that was by design, okay, because again, the person named Stephen Miller said this would be transformational. In other words, what the Trump administration is trying to do is saying, well, if we can't stop family-based immigration, we're going to use public charge in its implementation to keep certain people out. And this is something that was by design. Go ahead. Okay, so now, again, I think it goes back to the question you all were raising earlier, is what benefits are not counted? Regardless of this new test, okay, what benefits are not counted as public charge, okay? So these are the ones that do not count. Number one, benefits used by family members. So once again, the basic rule is if you're undocumented and you have US citizen children and you apply for a benefit for your child, okay, then that will not count against you. That's the basic rule number one, okay? CHIP, which is a children's health insurance, does not count as public charge. Medi-Cal, that's what Saira was raised earlier, by children under 21. Actually, now it's up to 26 now is the rule. That will not count as a public charge. Emergency Medi-Cal does not count as a public charge. Okay, so any undocumented person that has an emergency and has to go to emergency services, that will not count as a public charge. Medi-Cal that is distributed through the school system will not count as a public charge. Medi-Cal for prenatal and postnatal pregnancies, 60 days before and after a pregnancy, does not count as a public charge. Emergency and disaster assistance, for example, if you're up in the hills and you're undocumented, and let's say you have a home and you need emergency assistance or disaster assistance, that will not count as a public charge. Services available to the community, that's where, I guess the best example here is in Riverside County. They do have certain health clinics that's funded by the county. Those are not public charges. Those people that go to like a community clinic here in Riverside County, they will not be subject to the public charge test. WIC is another big one. That's women, infants, and children. That's usually for single parents or single mothers who get nutritional assistance for their children. That will not count as a public charge. Next one. Okay. Public health services, again, that's your county funded school, your county funded clinics. Like, for example, I know on Riverside Avenue, I think there's 2 East Side clinics. If they're funded by the state or the county, they don't count as public charge. School nutrition programs, okay, we see a lot of those now during COVID, where schools are distributing food, and it's through the Department of Education here in California, or through their own fundraising and their own networking. That does not count as a public charge. Okay, educational benefits like Head Start, although they try to put this one in, that does not count as a public charge. Unemployment insurance does not count as a public charge, but unfortunately, most undocumented folks are not eligible for unemployment insurance. Social Security retirement, once again, most undocumented folks are not quite there yet. You have to usually be a permanent resident to get Social Security retirement. However, undocumented folks are eligible for workman's compensation. In other words, if a person is injured on their job, okay, they qualify for workman's compensation, and that is not a public charge. Tax credits. Here in California, the governor just recently signed a law that will allow undocumented folks who use what's called an ITIN number to file their taxes. In other words, it's not a social security number. It's like a number to file taxes. Like, for example, if you're undocumented, you work for yourself. If you have your own taco stand, or you have your own gardening business and you work for yourself, you can legally file taxes using what's called an ITIN number, okay? And so if you get credit, so now in the state of California, if you're undocumented and you have an ITIN number, you can get tax credits here in the state of California. That's not a public charge, okay? Again, benefits used by family members. You have U.S. citizen children and they get benefits. Whatever benefits they receive, they don't count as public charges. And if you're in the armed forces or in the ready reserves, benefits received by their spouses and children will not count as public charges. Okay. Okay.
We have sorry, one more question. It says,
Sure.
so using public education program benefits and such doesn't count against you, but being younger than 18 does?
Yes, but if a person's under age of 18 and getting some type of public education benefit, that public education benefit will not count.
But if they use any other benefit other than public education, it will?
If they're under the age of 18?
Correct.
Well, if they're getting like state-funded Medi-Cal, then it won't count.
Okay. I think it was just confusing because in one of the slides you had a negative of being under the age of 18.
Yeah. Yeah, that's only if a person like is really under the age of 18. Okay, like I see what you're saying. So let's say a person goes to an interview, okay, and they're under the age of 18, but they're getting some type of public education benefit. The public education benefit will not count. However, them if they're still under the age of 18, then being under the age of 18, yes, that could still count, you know, as a negative factor. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. Okay, now this new policy was subject to a lot of litigation. Go ahead, because as you all can see, it was something that's used. It was people saw it's going to be used very, very harshly. Okay, and so we just put a timeline up here. When the law was first announced back in October 2018, there was a flurry of lawsuits. Okay, filed against it, and it actually was enjoined. In other words, it was stopped by a federal court because they basically said that this rule is a rule that was looking for some type of justification because it was too harsh. And again, the court recognized that immigrants come and contribute, and this was contrary to public policy in our own history. And so the federal court enjoined, in other words, stopped it from going forward. And then unfortunately, it got all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and so the Supreme Court said, okay, well, we're going to allow this litigation to continue, but while it's continuing, we're going to allow the public charge to still be implemented. So on February 24th of this year, that's when the public charge test went forward. Okay, finally. However, because of COVID, when the COVID pandemic hit, as you can all probably have seen, was again, undocumented folks were not applying for even benefits, for benefits under COVID that they were entitled to under COVID because they were afraid because of the public charge rule. Okay, so there was another lawsuit filed. Okay, basically going back to the same judge and said, look, now you can see, that how this public charge rule is going to really affect people. And so once again, the law was stopped. Okay, it was stopped in July 2020. Okay, because of COVID, because the court said, look, now we can see the harsh effects of this public benefits rule through COVID. So we're going to join the rule again. Okay, and then again it went back up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and unfortunately, on September 11th, the court made another ruling and said, no, we're going to allow this case. We will allow the lawsuit to go forward, but we will allow for the implementation of the public charge rule. So here we are. So now we have to go forward with the public charge. And one thing I forgot to mention was, in terms of that totality of circumstances test, the whole thing of, do you earn 250% more? Do you have assets? Do you have a positive credit score? Do you know English? There's the government, through the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, now has a special form for that. It's called the I-944. If you're trying to adjust your status, it's like an 18-page questionnaire about a person's assets, if they have a bank account, do they speak English, that a person now has to apply for. No, they have to submit when they want to adjust their status. Okay. Okay, now want to talk about this one?
Yes. And I think I saw that Lizeth Mendoza was on the call or in the meeting.
See it?
I saw her name, so okay. All right, so briefly, just wanted to share with y'all that it has become public through the website of USCIS, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They have announced that getting treatment or tested for COVID, including a vaccine, when it becomes available, it will not trigger public charge. That also includes if folks need assistance, housing and food programs, that will also not trigger them a public charge. So that's also key to share with communities, or if they're have been impacted by the fires, that any disaster relief assistance that they need to seek, they shouldn't fear getting that it would trigger them becoming a public charge in the future. Okay. So,
Okay, hold on.
oh,
Yeah, was one thing we forgot to mention is that another requirement that a person must do when they file, for say if I'm trying to immigrate my wife, okay, and show that she will not become a public charge, is I have to do what's called an affidavit of support. Okay. In other words, I have to prove that I earn enough money, to make, cause it's part of the law to maintain my wife. And so it basically is the 125% federal poverty guideline, okay? And what I have to do is show like 3 years of taxes, that I have my last 3 pay stubs, okay? And maybe a letter from my employer. And like, again, in the past, under the 1999 rule, up to 2019, if you had an affidavit of support, that basically took care of everything. There was no public charge, was not going to be an issue. Now, what they do with this new rule is you still have to do the affidavit of support, but they give it less weight because you have to show all the other factors. Okay. All right.
And really quick, sorry I was on, but I was catching up on a message, and I didn't get to finish any slides around this. But as I mentioned in some emails, this is Lizeth, by the way. There's something that we learned through the Western Law and Poverty Center, which I would prefer if they present on a later date, but and it really is good information for, I think, even health providers to know how they can code in the system. Basically, like if I do get COVID and I'm undocumented, they'll cover the treatment, as Saira said, but then they could possibly code in the system these are exact words that they use, to see if the person can get extra care. Like there's kind of like a loophole, I think, in this system, which benefits folks, because remember, a lot of these folks don't have access to healthcare in the first place, and there's a lot of band-aid solutions in the local area, the state, and obviously not even in the national. So there's a way that people can possibly get treated for their diabetes or other pre-existing conditions that could worsen because of COVID. And so that's something that we're finding is helpful, but not too many people have used it yet. I'll have to check with Western Law and Poverty Center to see if how it's been developing in the last couple of weeks when we first found out about it. Another presentation we'd like to do on a later date for purposes of time is also to discuss what local clinics offer. And again, it's not a lot, but we've learned through Borrego Health and other folks that there is a list of services that are available, and sometimes our folks don't know, or because, as mentioned, maybe throughout this presentation, because public charge exists, people are staying away from free services or low cost services because they think that they'll be considered a public charge. So people are pushing away from, you know, their own health and well-being and being pushed to choose between their health and their economic status because of being fearing that they would be labeled as a public charge. So there's a lot more to share, but we wanted to just focus today on public charge and we'll circle back at a later date.
Okay, so just to follow up, remember that the public charge test, again, is only applied in two situations: when someone's trying to enter the US on a visa, or they're trying to obtain permanent residency through a family member, okay? So when a person wants to apply for a public benefit, okay, they're not subject to the public charge, okay? That's only when they're trying to get an immigration benefit. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So now this is where we bring it back to y'all to see the knowledge that y'all have taken in. And I know I did see some comments or questions that were shared, but we'll leave it to the end, like to go back and review. We did see them, but this is where we bring it back to y'all, and we want y'all to volunteer to help us. We have 3 live examples where we apply the what was shared throughout the presentation and put it out like based on the communities that we all serve and are part of. So who wants to volunteer for the first scenario? Can I pick or?
You want to show what the question is first?
Yes, the first one is this one, so just read it and then. Okay, I guess I'll choose someone then. I'll choose Whitney. No. Can y'all hear us or no?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
we
hear.
can hear you.
Okay. So Whitney, can you read the first life example or scenario of like about public charge?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find the button. Marcos has DACA status since 2013 and enrolled in Medi-Cal. He is worried that the changes in public charge will impact his future with DACA. What can we tell Marcos?
Thank you, Whitney. So can you popcorn to someone or do you want me to choose?
Can you choose?
Okay. Omar?
Yeah. So we can tell Marcos that California allows DACA recipients to use some public benefits. DACA applicants are not subject to a public charge when applying to renew. They should speak with an attorney or a credit representative for more information on how to apply for DACA renewal.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one.
I keep going. Nancy has a green card and she is ready to become a US citizen. She's worried because she uses CalFresh, California's version of SNAP food stamps.
What can we tell Nancy? We'll popcorn to Jeffrey.
There is no public charge test to apply to become a US citizen. A person can apply for a fee waiver for a naturalization application if they receive a means tested benefit, example, CalFresh. Nancy should speak with an attorney or a DOJ accredited representative for more advice about her case.
Thank you. Can we popcorn to Stephanie? The last one.
I'm sorry, am I supposed to read it or answer it?
Read it.
Maria is undocumented. Her children are U.S. citizens. Her children qualify for Medi-Cal and CalFresh. Maria worries due to her immigration status.
Okay, so what can we tell Maria? Who wants to do it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. So I totally
I can read. What can you say to Maria? Parents of citizens can apply for public benefits for their eligible children. Children's use of benefits does not count against applicants on their immigration application. You should speak with an immigration attorney to make a family emergency plan. And Maria should speak to a lawyer or organization so that she knows her rights.
Sounds good. Thank you. And this is like the scenario or the example that is more common when talking to community about public charge. That's where the impact is seen. That's where the impact is seen. And okay, so it's important to know that public charge is not just about the benefits that have been expanded, and also the past of a person does not necessarily equal their future as to like their abilities to change their family situation, financial, and also educational. And a public charge does not apply to all immigrants.
Okay, so one last observation is that, as we have said, the law hasn't changed, but the implementation of the policy has. So in about 2 weeks, we're going to have an election. And let's just say there is a change hopefully, there is a change in administration. So if there is a change in administration, could there be another change in the public charge policy? Could we see something of a return to the old policy? The answer is yes. In fact, there's already been discussions about what could be done regarding public charge. But it's gonna, even if that scenario does come about though, it's gonna take some time because the federal government's gonna have to go back and change the policy, change the rules, and they're gonna have to publicize them. So it's gonna take, the damage has been done to some people, but the hope is that the change that will happen will happen soon enough so it will lessen the impact upon people in the future and maybe go back to some more reasonable and rational public charge implementation.
Okay, so these are the next slides are just resources of organization. Also, this one is on 3 organizations that are leading the campaign on public charge at a national level, and some of them have done the litigation with the courts to block public charge, the new rule. This is just a list of organizations at a state level that are providing education and outreach on public charge. And they also, some of these organizations provide legal consultations that are either free or at a low cost. Like our organization, we provide free legal consultations every Wednesday for folks that have questions about public charge or want to have a legal consultation to see what form of relief they're eligible for. So this is, I'll share this via email to Sophia so she can share with y'all. And this is more specific to COVID. The first one is like a list, a database that that has a list of organizations and services available during COVID that are not will not trigger a public charge. And the other one is the list by the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice, where the organization that Liseth is part of. And this is a handbook of resources. So just by texting that number, folks have access to a list that of food banks, where to get tested, and among other resources. And then we can leave it now for questions.
I can start. I have a question. Could you talk a little bit more about your experience with the chilling effect and maybe just like describe what it is and in your experience how it's impacted people's willingness to get benefits even if they are eligible for it? And then, sorry, it's a long question. Like, what can we do as medical students or providers to kind of prevent it or like fight it, and ensuring like people still get benefits despite their fear?
Well, as a legal service provider, where we have seen the impact is when they're applying for adjustment, like adjustment of status, like through a family member. when it comes to doing the I-944 form, that's where they have to disclose if they have ever received any benefit or their financial situation. That's where we see the impact. And where there's the balance of, like, positive factors and negative factors, and that's where folks and the undocumented folks have to prove um that they won't be a public charge. But yes, we do get calls on the uncertainty of knowing whether they should apply for Medi-Cal for their children who are eligible due to the expansion of Medi-Cal. But yeah, Lizette, I don't know if you have anything to add on.
Yeah, just the reason why also when the pandemic first hit, we created this list of resources so people, because it was literally weeks before that the public charge policy took effect, and there was all this back and forth since I guess going back to 2018, or even when the Trump administration first revealed that it was rumored that public charge would get rolled out. Um, and so that's why the resource list, and I put in the chat box, we want to add more to it, right? There's more information now developed around housing rights, and just more food banks, or pandemic EBT might come out again. It is likely to come out again. It's just in the works for the next round, which provided folks with food resources, basically money to replace the nutrition services that children were already getting at school. And so, there's just confusion again about whether they should or not should enroll into Medi-Cal. People completely unenrolled from services like Medi-Cal, or are continued to get bullied by their landlord, and being threatened that they're gonna call ICE on them because they're behind on rent, and especially now due to the pandemic. And so there's like different issues that I hear on my end, and then other staff that get calls to our emergency hotline. They're not only worried about ICE, being in the neighborhoods, or having a person detained in the largest detention center in Adelanto, but they're also worried about all these other issues. And so, and if I go back really quick to when the pandemic was first starting, I think there was this is how we met some of the UCR medical students, because there was all these health clinics and health fairs being organized. And so the efforts to do those health clinics were necessary, because it would kind of push back at the narrative that they would be subject to a public charge. And we wanted, to really provide the services for people, but also say, to take these services, use all the benefits that you can. Like none there's, the public charge test again doesn't apply to everyone. And so that's a little bit of what I could say. And I think just, yeah, we can say a whole lot more about the chilling effect. I think if we check in with all the other partners who also work on the ground or do legal services, they've seen it. And so, and one of the biggest one, and I'll stop with this, is WIC. Like right before all this started, I went into 2 WIC offices, and they had shared that so many of the moms had unenrolled their children from WIC as well. So, like Russell said, the damage has been done. We hope that through the pandemic and all these creative things that folks have done has given folks the confidence to go back into some of the benefits, but we're gonna have to see that.
Yeah, now just for me, I mean, the big question always is, every workshop is, what about benefits for my children? And so we have to keep, as Lisette brought it up, I mean, WIC is something very, very important. Okay, so the content is, look, your kids do qualify. Your kids do qualify. It's something we have to keep mentioning and harping on, because that, to me, that's where I see a big chilling effect is benefits for the U.S. citizen kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think someone in the chat box gave an idea. I don't know if Saira or Russell, because y'all did a lot of workshops on this in the community. and to different advocates and professionals. But somebody suggested if this video could be recorded, it is being recorded, but if it could be recorded in Spanish and shared in a YouTube video, so we circulate that through text, massive text messages, or through our social media platforms. I think that'd be a great idea, right, to create something like that if it doesn't already exist. And yeah, just the question of like how can medical students and their network support. I think that'd be a great way to brainstorm on what we could do. I know we've talked on the sidelines about other ideas as well.
Yeah, we can, we do have the one pager that in English and Spanish, and I know some of the organizations that I share, they also have in other languages. But yeah, when we have the time to present in Spanish, we can do the recording in Spanish so that can be accessible for folks. But usually what works best is when